Major decisions here in a minute. Hell, Kathy wouldn't even show up.
It's 5:30.
Condemnation for public infrastructure.
It ends at 5:30. I promise the posting says 5. You can check me. I can tell you what. But it is.
Hey, man.
5.
That is so disrespectful. Oh, this man. Oh, here's mine.
What was the last one? You're right, Hillary. I'm sorry to doubt you. Hillary was right.
Are we ready? Who's doing the report? Who's this?
It does not happen.
Are we ready? We ready? This is real. All right. All right, we're calling this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Lucas, Denham, Cooper,
Here.
Milton, Howden, LeBlanc, Schultz.
Here.
Your Honor, you do not have a quorum.
That's great. All right. My first meeting, nobody shows up for it. This is fun. Is the mayor online with us, or he's at the next meeting?
He should be online. Yeah, he's on here right now. I see him on the Zoom.
Mayor Milton, are you with us? Okay. All right, this study session is discussion of condemnation for public infrastructure projects, and Holly Dodge is going to lead us on this, right?
Hello and good evening. I'm so glad you all can be here for such an important conversation. My coworker, James Newell, is going to be presenting on eminent domain. He has experience in multiple jurisdictions in this type of use of a tool in completing rejuvenation of utilities. And he will be on in just a minute.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Can you see my screen also?
Yes.
Okay. All right, perfect. Well, I'm going to go on down to the first slide here. And I know there's a lot of negative connotations about eminent domain and condemnation. And typically I would agree with you on the actual taking of a property, but the process for easements is really just a use of the property. You're not taking anything from the homeowner. They're just allowing the city to use the land to get the infrastructure in. After the infrastructure is in place, the city is required to repair any damage that was caused by it. So a lot of times it's actually ends up being better for the homeowner, fixing anything with the property that could have had some issues before. At the same time, you know, they get better water service, they get better roads, they get better sidewalks and that type of stuff. So typically this is an advantage to the homeowner. It's not really a disadvantage, and it doesn't really hurt their property value. Most times it increases the property value. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I know there's been a lot of, or most people have negative connotations, but for this particular use, I think it actually really helps the property owner and the city as a whole. And like the slide here says, the private property may be used by cities of the fourth class for public use to establish opening, widening, extending, or altering any street or for any other necessary public purposes. There's two different types of easements typically that we see: a temporary easement and a permanent easement. The permanent or the temporary easement is used to place equipment and materials and that type of stuff, so the infrastructure can be put in. And then the permanent easement is there for any maintenance or repair that has to come along later on down the road. And like I said, the benefits, improving the roads, upgrading infrastructure and utility services, increasing safety in the utilities and on the roadway. Then the third slide is just kind of a timeline of kind of what the process is. I want to point out there's a 60-day notice that gives the homeowner or the property owner notice of what the city's trying to do. And then the 30-day written offer. Between the 60 and 30-day letters, the city will go out and get an appraisal for the easement. And then the city can decide how much they want to offer for that easement. And obviously the property owner can decide to accept the offer or decline it. And then we would go ahead and file a petition and go through the actual process to get the easement in place through the courts. Anybody have any questions up to this point?
James, this is Glenn Schultz, if they do accept the written offer, do you still need to go to court?
No, you do not. Once they accept the offer, we can go ahead, proceed. We'll document the easement like we would any other easement. And then that process or that easement would be in place and we wouldn't have to proceed to the actual petition, filing the petition with the court.
So if we do go to court, if they didn't accept the offer, so we're at step 4, what's typical in terms of timeline before it's complete? It's step 8.
So obviously we're at the mercy of the court. Typically what I've seen from step 1 to finalizing or getting the court's order, it's about 6 months. It could be quicker, it could be longer, just depends on how the court is moving their docket through.
Does that 6 months include the 90-day clock in step 2 and 3?
Yes, it does. The 90-day, so the 60-day and 30-day, you just have to give, in theory, you can actually give the 60-day and 30-day notice at the same time. That's typically not how it works. You just have to give those two notices to the homeowner or the property owner prior to filing the petition. But typically we'll send the 60-day letter out. We'll try to get the appraisal started as soon as possible. So as soon as we get the appraisal back, we can then send us the 30-day letter out. And depending on which one hits first or last, we can file the petition immediately after that.
And
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, how does the valuation of property work when it's simply an easement? I'm familiar more if you are condemning it for ownership. Easement would seem, since they don't really lose control of the property, that somehow it's much less. So how does that evaluation work?
Well, obviously, if you're condemning the property and actually taking the property and transferring ownership, there's an easier way to do it. You can do it by the square footage, other properties in the area that have sold. So it's easier for everybody to understand what's going on. On the side of an easement, there's they go through the same process, but then they try to figure out what the use would be, or when the city's actually on the property using it, what that would look like. And it's more or less like kind of a rental type appraisal.
Is that done? Are there certified people that do those types of appraisals?
Yes, it's the same appraisers that do typical appraisals for when you're selling a property, when you need to value a property as a whole.
So just to kind of scope me in here, if say if we were condemning property to take ownership and it was valued at $10 a square foot, are we talking about something in the $1 a square foot for easements, or?
I would probably say less than that. We recently had one, and I think the property value was valued at around $900,000, and the easement was roughly valued at $5,400.
Okay, and then we've got probably at least 2 projects right now. We've got one in a residential district called Hiawatha Heights, where we want to put in new infrastructure and new road. and we've got 80 easements signed and I think about 20 outstanding in that development. Since there's 20 in that case, and then we have another one in the Highway 76 project where there's maybe a half a dozen or so outstanding yet, that number's
Okay.
somewhat in flux. Does each one of those, I take it, necessitate completely separate court hearings, completely separate processes?
So yes and no. So we'll file separate petitions on each one. The court will likely take them up as one, consolidate them and take them up as one case per se. Because they're, the appraisals are gonna be very similar, obviously, the properties are right next to each other. So the appraisals will be the same, but they'll be separate cases, but they'll be consolidated with one judge and most likely one hearing. But again, that's up to the court also.
Hey, James, Clay Cooper. So would each of these property owners be responsible for their own court fees, lawyer fees? I mean, they would be out expense going this route, correct?
Yes, they would. I will say this is a rather easy one for pro se clients to go through. There's requirements and procedures that the court and from our side we have to follow. We have to get the court will require appraisals on their own. They will require three different commissioners to come to review and then come together, and they will find the value, and that's typically what the court uses. So if it's a pretty contentious, I could see where attorney would be. There might be attorney involved, but I think it's an easier one for individuals to take on because it's a very procedural process.
But still, there's going to be some out-of-pocket money, and there's going to be time, hassle, going to court. So I only say that to say that, let's say there's some property, maybe there's somebody listening to this online that is one of these holdouts, right?
Yep.
And they're thinking, well, I'm not going to sign this because if I just hold out and they do a condemnation, then they're going to have to pay me for it. And that might be the case, but what I hear you say is it's very little money and the time and hassle and money out of their pocket to go through this, right?
Yeah, it will take some time on their part. So I'm not going to tell you that there is no expense. There's time expense. And obviously I think it always helps when you have attorneys involved when you're in court, just helping you through the process. So I think it's a good idea to have an attorney just to represent you, but I don't think it's 100% needed. But there's definitely some time involved that's going to require the homeowners to go through to process everything.
Right.
And typically, I'm not going to say typically, but the city might offer more at the beginning than the commissioners might come back with also. So that there's still some gamble there that the homeowners or the property owners would be taking, that if they come back with a lower amount, that's and it's a court order, then that's what they're going to get.
Similarly, James, do you have any guidance for us as a city in terms of just generally what our expenses would look like for doing this type of activity?
I think the appraisal, you can probably look at, when you get 22 appraisals in the same area, they're probably a little bit cheaper. But let's just say anywhere from $300 to $500 an appraisal. And then it's probably.
Well, I have to be counted in the meeting.
Yeah, I think they're probably hearing you right now, so.
Oh,
We hear you, Mayor.
sorry. Excuse me, Clay.
No, you're good.
Okay, I just wanted to let Hillary know that I've been on the meeting. I've been watching and listening. It's just I'm struggling with my video side.
Well,
Thank you, Mayor.
We hear you loud and clear. Anything you want to add or say?
Nope, I'm going to put this back on mute and keep working on my video.
Okay. Sorry, Glenn. Was you talking, Glenn?
No, we were just talking, I think, about what we should expect as a city from a cost if we move forward on these type of activities. So you were saying, I think, $500 for appraisals, and then I think that's when you were interrupted.
Yeah, and with this many, we can obviously copy and paste, and the petitions will be, pretty much the same, just using different legal descriptions, addresses, that type of stuff. So that'll streamline it a little bit. So I would look at maybe, it's hard to say. I don't want to give you a hard number. I would look at maybe $1,000, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 per property.
Yeah, that's close enough. I was just looking for a ballpark. I appreciate that. Now, most, in one project, the Hiawatha Heights project, that's all residential. In the other case, it's all businesses. Do you see any differences in terms of activity, exposure, length of time when we start dealing with corporations and businesses?
You mean going through the condemnation process?
Yeah, right. Particularly if, at the 30-day written offer, they don't accept it and you proceed into circuit court. Do you tend to see differences, protractions, anything like that?
Like I said, it really depends on the court. If they're moving their docket pretty quick, I don't think there's going to be much of a difference. And again, if you get attorneys involved, you can imagine that'll lengthen a little bit also.
Is there any notion that attorneys could drag this out, through continuation activities and so on?
There's always a chance you could get a continuance on something, but the court wants to move these along and understands understands that the city wants to get these moved along really to benefit, the city and the citizens within the city. So the court's not going to drag it along too long without, before they start, I think getting them in court and stuff. You got to remember there's the commissioners hearing and the commissioners, they come out and review the property. So there's really two things that'll slow us up. The commissioners, if they don't get on it and get through the process, and then if the court keeps the process, slower. Those are really the two hangups there, I think.
And is there anything other than the consideration of the value of the condemnation that tends to be contested in these things once you're in the court phase?
No. I guess you could, there could be some differences on the size of the easement possibly. I've never had that come up. I don't think the city's going to try to overuse the property, have the easement too large or anything like that. And actually, let me scroll down here. Here's kind of what, here's an example of one of the easements that we've gotten approved for actually water. If you see the pink area here, that's the permanent easement. And then the striped blue area, that's where the temporary easement would be. Like I said, that's specifically for, having the material and the equipment there to put the infrastructure in.
Ralph, do you have anything to add or ask? No. Alex?
James, how often do you see this used by other municipalities in our area?
Typically, once we get an offer out there that the people feel good, that the city and the homeowners feel good with, they'll take it. Sometimes you just get the property owners that are completely against it and just, really hard-headed. If you think about it, if you're getting new roads put in or if you're getting new water put in, that's really a benefit to the property and the homeowners. You get better water pressure, you get cleaner water. If you're replacing, water pipes, there's a reason why you're replacing them. It's not, the city's not going to spend money just to spend money. So, I would say once we put an actual offer in front of them, most people take it. There'll probably be some holdouts. I think the one I'm working on right now, I think we had 28 easements that we needed to get, and we're working on 6 right now. One of them, they can't find the guy, so we've got to go through the process. And the 5 others we think, or 4 of the 5 we think are going to take the offer, and the one's just a holdout, and so we'll go through that process and get it done.
James, is there any, excuse me, is there, one of the discussions that came up publicly in our CID board meeting was that by using this type of condemnation, we may, for future phases of the project, potentially trigger a behavior where people will deliberately hold out in order to be paid for their easement rather than voluntarily giving easements. Have you got any experience in that area?
Yeah, I haven't had anything where it's, where we have half a subdivision done and then the other half is done, and then the people know that, there were some holdouts that got paid. I would have, there's definitely the opportunity to do that. People talk, and if some of them got paid and some of them didn't, and they know they can hold out for even to get the 30-day letter and get the offer from the city, it's, there's always that chance. So I'm not going to tell you it's not going to happen, but I would hope the citizens realize the benefit of the infrastructure and that type of stuff, and would be willing to let the city use it for a very minimal amount of time, really, if you think about it.
Yeah, I would think so too, but in the case of our Hiawatha Heights project, it benefits every homeowner. I mean, it's, new water lines, new meters, new city street, all those kind of things, and yet we've got about 20 people who say, no way.
Yeah.
I don't know that they've said no. I believe they haven't signed off, just as a point of
Yeah, that's
clarification.
fair, that's
Sorry.
fair. People that are impeding the project.
Any
Yeah.
lack of signature does affect the ability to proceed or would require a change in the plan.
Yeah, and many times if you have grants or, state or federal grants or anything like that, you have to have the easements prior to even putting it out to bid.
The one other question is sometimes in the corporate side on our 76 project, we can see who we're taxing from a property tax perspective by the, county records.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sufficient in terms of moving forward with a condemnation, or will we in any way be required to dig deeper than that level? Because many times we have these LLCs within LLCs within LLCs in different states. How much are we responsible for digging through that, or do we just have to deal with the official county record?
We will have to get service on them, but once we file the petition. So it's best if we can run down, in the 30 and 60-day letter and make sure that we're talking to the correct person. So we might be able to open that dialogue and get this, approved by them prior to filing the petition. But regardless, we're going to have to figure out who the person is, or who the corporation, the correct corporation is. And if it's typically the property owner is that corporation, there will be somebody to accept service, either the Secretary of State or their registered agent, that should be getting them those documents, so they can review them.
James, how long did you say earlier, if one of these had to go to court, how long did you say the process was from the time of filing to wrap it up? What was it? 6 months?
Yeah, typically from the day of from the approval of the ordinance, and then after filing and everything, it typically takes 6 months. but like I said, we're still at the mercy of the court and the commissioners getting their stuff done. And with, if we had to take 22, it might take a little bit longer. Because these commissioners are gonna have to come out. I don't know if they would, if the court would get a couple different groups of commissioners, or if they would just have 3 commissioners do all 22 properties, but they have to write a report for every single property that we file a petition for. So that could extend this out a little bit if it's that many properties.
James, can you switch back to the display of the different steps? And one of the steps I don't believe you've had the opportunity to talk about, that the timing of step 7 and step 8.
So, okay, so we would file it, best case scenario, we would file it on day, let's just say, if we got the appraisals back quickly, best case scenario, we could file it on day 61, the petition. The condemnation hearing would happen. We would discuss, we would go to court. We would discuss what's going on. The commissioner's hearing and property viewing, that's solely on the backs of the commissioners. They go out and view the property, and then they have their hearing. And then the commissioner's report is a report by the 3 commissioners. They come together, decide on what they feel the value is. Once that's provided to the court and the parties, then the parties can file exceptions, and if they wanted to, they could go out and get their own appraisal, and then the court would kind of decide between the two, between the commissioner's report and the appraisal by the homeowner. I've seen a lot of times they'll just split it right down the middle. Well, like I said, with something for easements, the amounts are going to be pretty low. I think the one that I told you about previously, that was around $5,400. I think it was much larger easements, a much larger easement that the city was trying to get from this property owner. So I would assume, the values would come in anywhere from $600 to $1,000 at the most.
James, based on your experience, how many people, or what percent would you estimate that once you get into the written offer tend to accept it rather than letting it proceed to court?
I think the majority, when you, I'm not going to say threaten, but when you say you're going to file a petition and, we're going to go through the court process, that kind of opens people's eyes, and they realize that this is something the city really wants and is going to ultimately will most likely get from the court. So instead of going through the headache, they'll typically just take the offer or make a counter offer. I've seen some cities, will offer different stuff. So that's up to the city on how much and what they want to offer on the 30-day letters.
Well, and you just said something that the city wants. Well, the city wants to do it because they want to help the residents that are having issues with all the water breaks and the water lines, and there's a lot of issues in that particular neighborhood, and I don't know. I just think it's a shame that a few holdouts can delay and prolong this, and one holdout can make this go 6 months later. Meanwhile, there's still water lines breaking and people, without water for days at a time while the city gets it patched up. It just, I don't know, it seems crazy to me, over $700 or $800.
I agree completely. And it's obviously frustrating for the city because they're out there spending money fixing these when they could be spending money replacing them.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand the frustration.
I just hope the holdouts realize that by holding out, you're only hurting your neighborhood and your neighbors that need better water lines.
Yeah. And, I want everybody to remember, this is strictly a use. This is not a taking. This is not your typical, what you hear about eminent domain and condemnation. The city's not taking, they don't have legal rights to anything other than using the property.
Yeah.
And once the infrastructure is replaced, you could go 15 or 20 years without the city ever having to come back out there.
Yeah. That's right. And once they're done, they're gone, and it's still your grass and, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of properties, you know, when you're replacing infrastructure that's that old, you know, the property around it's settled and there's different issues with yards and stuff. And a lot of times the cities come in and they have to repair the easement, you know, when they, or the infrastructure when they dig it up or replace it. A lot of times the properties are actually better off after the city comes in and does this work than they were before.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what the authorization ordinance has to look like? Is it specific to the properties, to just the neighborhood? How does that read?
We'll make it, I think there's a couple different ways we can do it, but we'll make it specific to the properties.
You do have to establish the basis of the public use, that it is reasonable. So there's all the statutory requirements that are a part of that ordinance.
Will we go so far as to list addresses of the properties we're talking about, or geo coordinates, or what? How does that look?
Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna look at one real fast and give you exactly what is required. I can't remember off the top of my head here.
James
If
Raffle
there's
Blanc here.
any property owners that you don't know, you do have a requirement for publication. I believe in both of the projects you've mentioned today, we have readily identified the ownership.
Hey, James, this is Alderman LeBlanc.
Yeah,
There's a lot of dialogue going on. I just wanted to let you know I'm here. That's okay.
okay.
Thank
Yeah, so we'll show, so the ordinance will state what the reasoning for the need of the easements, and then we'll specifically attach exhibits with the property, legal description, and an actual picture of the easements or where they will be placed on the property.
As we've seen in our negotiations, not only having the legal description as well as, our maps are so much better now than what they used to be. We do overlays of it so that they can see what it would look like from an aerial. But what you're seeing here, it also shows how that overlay, yes, it goes over my favorite apple tree, or it doesn't. So they really help for people who are visual. Not many of us can, in our minds, comprehend what the quarter section of the quarter section is.
Yeah, and this picture here is a slimmed down version. I couldn't get some personal stuff off of it without really condensing it. So this is a much smaller picture of a parcel that shows this easement, and then it has the house there so that you can really see what it's going to affect on the property.
Great. So I know just from sitting in the 76 CID meetings that those drawings and everything are probably readily available already. How about Hiawatha Heights? If we wanted to move forward with this on the Hiawatha Heights, Kendall, do we have drawings available and property descriptions for what we're asking for in the way of these easements? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yes, we have exhibits created already. Our engineer had created those as part of their design contract.
So then, Holly, I mean, if a couple aldermen asked for this to be put on an upcoming agenda, it sounds like we're fairly ready to move in terms of getting the ordinance together.
Yes, Branson is very sophisticated in its preparation for all of these projects. So at the point that we began acquiring easements, we would have been in a position to be able to file such a case.
I'm sorry to,
It's just been everyone's preference that the hope was everybody would understand and respect that this is making the world better, especially for them. It's not, we're putting in a street so that I can quicker get to another place or to come to City Hall or something like that. It is to directly affect those to which we would be getting the easements from. It's a betterment.
And I think that's the frustrating part is, it's by every standard, it's an improvement of their neighborhood. by every standard with no loss to them. And yet we have people who won't commit. Very frustrating.
It's only a benefit,
Yes.
100% benefit.
And
Yeah.
that's what James was talking about. So if we take out your driveway entrance or we affect the sidewalk, then those get upgraded. So it is a substantial benefit for an entire neighborhood.
Looks like the mayor has his hand raised.
Oh, you could see that.
That's pretty high tech, Mayor. Good job.
Look I lowered it. Question I have, since Glenn has already put Kendall on the spot, I'll do the same. At the last, we had a discussion where I believe one of the alternatives, instead of going through the condemnation process for Hiawatha Heights, Kendall, do we still have an alternative of joining the new infrastructure to the homeowner's existing infrastructure outside of the easement?
Yes, so we could stop the new construction at the curb or right-of-way line, which would entail connecting a new service line, or I guess removing a portion of the city's owned service line and connecting it back up to an existing at the curb. So the rest of it remain as is until we can resolve the easement issues. So we could potentially move the project along.
Yeah, so Clay, I know that if that's an alternative, where instead of condemning and going through this whole legal process, how does the board feel about looking at that option that Kendall just described instead of going this condemnation route?
And I had heard, and maybe I'm mixing up projects here, so correct me if I'm wrong, that some of because of the age of that neighborhood, even the easements to the curb are in question in some places, as to whether we really have city property up to the curb or something like that?
I'd have to look at that again a little bit further in detail, but I believe most of our curbs are within city right-of-way itself. The right-of-way was, the street was not centered in the right-of-way, so we had more right-of-way on one side than we had on the other side. And so that's what required additional easements in those areas. So we'd have to take a little bit more in-depth look at it, but I think all of our curbs are actually in right-of-way.
So, Mr. Mayor, you're thinking, if I understand it, then that we'd go ahead up to the curb, and then when those other people wanted to connect, they'd have to pay all incremental costs?
Absolutely. If they weren't willing to sign an easement while we're putting it in, if they would want to come in later, I would think it's reasonable that would be at their expense. And the other question, when we had this discussion, and this is for Holly, if we go down this road we're talking about now, this alternative to the condemnation, would we be in a position to cause the homeowner who does not sign this easement to be responsible for that portion of the water line that they did not give an easement for us to replace?
We are only responsible, and Mr. Powell, I'll let you back me up. We are only responsible for the main. The connection to the main into the house is the responsibility of the homeowner or the property owner.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm talking about the piece from the line going down the street, the lateral going to the homeowner's meter. Is that right, Kendall?
So by standards of a public water system, we're responsible from the main to the meter itself. And that's also written in code. So in code, it's written that on the back side of the meter, on the customer side of the meter, the downstream side of the meter to the building or structure is their responsibility. So it is in code that we're responsible from the meter to the main.
And is that meter on past the curb typically then? Or is it in the street?
It's typically on property.
It's on property, so, so we kind of are in an odd spot if by code we have to maintain that, but the homeowner's not going to give us an easement to do that.
It is in these older subdivisions where easements, utility easements along the perimeter of the lots wasn't established during the time of the plat process. That does put us in a particular odd situation. So.
The other thing that it frustrates is your intent, as I understood it, is to go to electronic reading meters. And so we're left with old meters that we can't get to that somebody now still has to go out and manually read. Is that correct?
So right now, we do have automated read meters. It's called a remote read system. So it's picked up by a computer and antenna in a pickup truck. We're wanting to migrate to advanced meter read system, which relays the signal to a collector that's on one of our water towers, and it's daily reads. So instead of once a month read, we can get daily reads back to our billing system and our customers themselves so they can keep track of their usage. As of right now, if we have an issue with the water meter, we typically just go on site and fix it as we have to provide water to that customer itself. Generally, the property owner doesn't contest that because they want water in those situations.
Are we in a position that if they've refused right-of-way to us, can we refuse service to them until they grant right-of-way? Or easement, I'm sorry, not right-of-way.
Make them responsible for the expense. And Holly, that's really a question for you. Is it more involved than changing our code that says the city, what our code says today, our city is responsible for the main and the lateral up to the water meter? That's what the code currently says. Is it realistic for these that are choosing not to sign an easement to rewrite that and include the language that on such and such a day, based on these documents, city requested an easement to replace these lines, homeowners refusing to sign it, and therefore the homeowner is responsible for any repairs for the water line that is not within the easement?
That would be a question I would want to take a little time at before I made a public statement advising the city.
So, and thank you for saying that. And yeah, I didn't mean to put you on that spot, but I think at least logically that makes sense. The city's willing to pay and put in these new improvements. If a homeowner chooses not to allow the city to have a darn construction easement to get it done, then it just makes sense that the city does not keep paying to repair these old lines. That the homeowner, by choosing not to allow the city to put in a new line, it's reasonable that they would be responsible for any repairs in the future.
What's reasonable and what's allowed by law may not always agree. So I'm
Really?
going to hold and defer to respond in the legal advice on that. I think there's a couple of other aspects that we are not considering.
Holly, you're breaking up.
I think it's just on your end. But again, I said I'm not going to answer.
Oh, he heard you, you're just breaking up.
Yeah, I heard. Oh, that's funny.
Mr. Mayor, I think that's an excellent idea, and I think
We
at our
talked
last
about
discussion, we
this.
talked about that,
Yeah.
right? But I think Kendall said it, or Holly said it, the easements have to be in place in order to get that federal funding. Would that be a hangup at that point, or could we still proceed accordingly?
So accordingly, right now, we don't have any federal funding as part of this project. This would be tourism dollar funded project.
So,
Then let's bulldoze, let's go.
so Kendall, so just a short recap. If we chose this route and there's 10 homes in there that said no, they're still going to have everything. They're just not going to have anything new. You're going to patch up to it, go past that one, go to the next one, blah, blah, blah. And then at some point, if they decide, oh, we'd like to have that too, then that's all on their dime. Is that the scenario we're saying?
Yes, that's the scenario.
Okay, so if we chose that route, a couple of things. First of all, does that make it more expensive for the city to do it that way as opposed to just, if we're going up, patch it, go around it? Is there going to be an increased amount of cost by bypassing a home here or there? Do you see that?
No,
Not
actually,
really?
it should be a slight deduct on the
Just because
project.
less cost or supplies?
Upfront, yeah.
Yeah.
But later on, as we hopefully complete the entire project by moving the meters closer to the right-of-way within an easement area and replacing those setters and meter pits, we'll have that cost at that point.
And then if this homeowner holds out for a while and they decide to sell their house, then that's just on the new owner, or that's between the guy that sells it and the,
Yeah, we would approach the new owner and work through an easement at that time.
okay. Well, I sure do like this, is let them pay for it as opposed, it makes more
Yeah.
sense.
That seems to potentially work for the Hiawatha project. Can we switch and talk the same conversation about what we're doing with this Highway 76 project? I heard in the public meetings that, for redesign of some sections of that, I think this is a little dated now when we had more people that weren't signing, but we were talking about potentially $1 million of re-engineering work to get around the people that would not grant temporary and utility easements.
I believe we've progressed significantly in our key negotiations. And so we're very optimistic that any of the changes would be minor. While they would be obvious, they would be minor. But yes, it's a whole different beast, right? This is upgrades all the way across the board. And by having the easements in place, it is the least amount of inconvenience to all of the people, including our guests and our visitors, because of the construction being a smooth process.
Yeah, it's also continuity of appearance when we're done as well, right? So beyond can we engineer around them, there's also the question of do we want that look for such a major project to have these, skip over type properties that look the old way instead of the new way.
And Mr. Newell would tell you this is a very different in kind because it's different types of easements. We have pedestrian streetscaping. We also have utilities, undergrounding. So this has different layers of temporary construction, long-term construction. It's holistic, but this is all within the street right-of-way. The majority of the work that we're doing is incidental to the street, not impinging or infringing on the ownership right of the person on the property.
So kind of sum it up, do you think the board is, and I'm not asking you to represent the board, but just general sense is, have they moved far enough along that they're not going to be coming to the aldermen to ask for easement condemnations, or is that still a potential?
I would defer to Kathy on that.
Thank you, Holly. I would say that there was not an appetite to pursue a condemnation, right, at least at this moment in time, especially since we've made significant progress over the last 2 weeks in achieving some more really important easements. So, we just keep talking, just keep negotiating and ironing out the details. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that we're going to see very few holdouts by the time we need this to be complete to move forward. So I'm an eternal optimist on this.
Yeah, I heard those same terms in the board meetings that I've sat in, the appetite for it. And I know the issue was concern that it would set a standard for future phases of the project seemed to be the primary concern that cause that appetite issue. But I'm looking at it, since the CID is really only responsible for the funds and managing the appearance of things, I'm kind of thinking about it from the city perspective of, do we want a complete, well-done project, or are we going to accept this skip-around stuff? And that seems to be more of a city issue than a board issue.
And I don't disagree with that. I think you remember my comments in those meetings as well, that this is a city project and it's an improvement of infrastructure, not just appearance. And do we want to do this all the way and do it right? But again, we're just going to hopefully not have to bring that item back to you for discussion further on the 76 CID, because I do feel really good about where we are today.
Mayor, do you have anything else you want to add?
Kathy, when's our next 76 CID meeting?
I'll have to get back to you on that, Mayor.
Wow, a lot of getting back to the mayor.
That's what happens when you're not here.
December 18th at 1:30.
Oh, wow, you just made, wow. Right, yeah. Don't worry, Kathy, I got it.
So my suggestion is going to be, and I have heard we've had a considerable amount of agreements. What I, maybe on the December 18th meeting, before we continue a condemnation discussion, is ask Jeremy to provide us with a visual, like she did at our last meeting, of what that would look like with the current property owners that are refusing to sign. And it's going to be a combination of what that continuity is going to look like, right? How many are not signing and what's that going to look like? Because I'll tell you, it sounds like the condemnation process or the redesign. So Kathy, you're saying that we were looking at $1 million redesign, but with the number of properties that have come in, you're thinking that will be considerably less?
Yes, sir.
And the amount of time for the redesign, yeah, I think I would. Well, I don't know if I'd favor that. I'm favoring, we need to get this thing moving. And I just don't think we have enough information until we can visually see the new agreements that have come in.
Yeah, the other thing I'd encourage our city representatives on that CID board to think about, I get the appetite discussion, but I'd almost flip the coin the other way and say, if we allow people on this phase to say no, and we don't put any teeth behind this, be prepared for other people on other phases to say no, because they've seen that the city doesn't care.
Yeah,
Is that all, Mayor?
yeah, I think if it's minimal amount of patchwork, if you will, then, and it's something that we can live with, that'll probably end up being the decision that my vote would be on the 76 committee.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Any aldermen? Kathy, you have anything to add before we take a break? Holly? Anyone?
Thank you so much to Mr. Newell for this presentation and
Yes.
his
Yeah, thanks. That was
knowledge in
great.
the matter. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, very good. We appreciate it.
If you guys have any other questions or concerns, definitely reach out to me.
Do we need to have a motion? Oh, we don't have a quorum.
No quorum.
Okay, we'll be back at 6 o'clock.